what section we're cruising through to.
Oh gosh, well, ADUs, no, with first.
Well, it's fire safety, the whole section on.
There's
fire.
the study on fire safety, but first we wanted to talk about ADUs as a public
Right.
building, et cetera, so.
Right.
We are live and it is Friday, February 10th in Senate Economic Development. We know that Senator Brock will be late. We got a much needed appointment that, you know, personal stuff sometimes really valuable to take care of when we don't have much time during the week. But he also shared some thoughts with me to sort of convey as we go along. Mike, is there anything that you wanted to say about the bill before we ask questions, or were you ready to hear our questions?
Good morning. For the record, I'm Mike DeRocher, the Executive Director for the Division of Fire Safety, and I don't really have any questions regarding the bill, so I'm open to any questions. And
okay,
just,
I don't want to put you on the spot, but either, from what I remember, Commissioner Hanford said that he was going to talk to you and someone was going to bring us some thoughts and possible changes for this section on ADUs as a public building. Do you have any?
Right, I figured this would come up as a question. So, yeah,
Let's.
All right.
That's it.
So on the ADU, I do have a question regarding the inspection of the owner-occupied structure if the ADU is connected to that primary residence. And the reason I have some concern about that is a lot of times the infrastructure, meaning plumbing, electrical, mechanical, are so intermingled with each other that we have to look at the primary residence. That's basically how we've been treating it. And then additionally in our statute, there's language where if the roof is connected from one structure to the next, then the whole building becomes a public building. So I know there's been some concern expressed about whether that is too intrusive. We just have not had any issues with this. And, you know, I will say this, on the 1 and 2 family dwellings, that's what this would be classified as far as the life safety code. Those requirements are really the least restrictive standards that are out there, right? So they're not really restrictive. We look at windows, making sure each bedroom has a window and that there's smoke and CO alarms and that kind of stuff. So that's,
you're making sure each bedroom has a window that a firefighter can get through. I can't remember.
Correct.
Like, okay. I mean, that
more
can
than
be challenging.
36 inches off the floor, something like that.
Okay.
You can't be too high.
But you're saying if you look at that for the ADU, you also have to look at it for an attached dwelling for the owner of that.
correct, if it's connected. If it's structurally connected. So a lot of the ADUs are actually not connected.
Okay. When you say structurally connected, you mean under the same roof?
Correct.
It
So,
doesn't matter if they have different hookups or they have a partition of some sort.
That's correct.
so the apartment over the carriage house, the apartment in the carriage house qualifies as a separate unit.
Correct.
It doesn't have a,
And so that, Mike, gets inspected, and does it have building expectations and requirements that are different for an ADU?
I'm sorry, no, the 1 and 2 family dwellings, the same exact requirements would pertain. A fair amount of I'm sorry.
Sorry, I think I don't want us to get confused here. If it is a separate building, they're inspecting it separately. They're not entering the owner occupied dwelling that's
Correct.
not being rented as a public building. But if they're under the same roof, they would have to go into the owner occupied dwelling and check for windows that are the right size and height, etc. And you're saying that hasn't been an issue? That's, tell us more about that, because, we don't want, if everyone in this space talking disappeared and new people were in our places, would there be an issue if someone walked in and found that, somehow the single family home had a room with smaller windows that you couldn't get out, or it's just the whole home has to have a few means of egress? Every bedroom has to have those large windows, and I mean,
Right,
smoke and CO2 is not as hard.
Right. Each window has to, every bedroom or sleeping area has to have at least one window meeting rescue and ventilation. We did modify our code a few years back to downsize the opening requirements to allow the whole removal of the window to be calculated into the area, right? So that it wasn't just the lower sash when it's in the open position. So we did modify our rules, which really cut down on the number of variances that we were receiving from building owners on changing the windows out. So that code change was vetted through the fire service, and it's been in our rules now since 2015.
Okay, so when you say there's no concerns about going in and checking for these life safety measures under the same roof, most people are simply meeting them. They have the right size windows in each bedroom and they have smoke and CO2.
Correct.
Or you feel like it's happening.
Right. The problem we run into, to be honest with you, sometimes is sleeping rooms in the basement, where they have no way out of the basement, and we've had fire fatalities because people can't get out of the basement area. So and understand all our fire fatalities are in residential occupancies.
Yeah, well, when it comes to that, is there some disagreement right now within the administration about if you do go into a single family home with an ADU and you find that whether or not it's the owner that's using that space, do you now tag that? And I mean, that's just a life safety issue. So
Right. I'm assuming I'm on the same page with the administration on this issue.
okay.
Yeah.
So you haven't been directed to change any of the language in the public building section?
I have a couple of questions before we move on.
Yes, I will add this.
Okay.
We are going to, just so that we can clarify an issue, if you read our definition of a public building under 20 VSA 2730, there's under B, under section B, the term public building does not include, and we are going to make a change there so that it is articulated for clarity that the owner occupied single family residence with an accessory dwelling unit as permitted under 24 VSA, unless used for the purpose described in subsection AD of this section, which means that if it's rented. So right now there's a little bit of, there's clarity that needs to be made in the statute under the definition, because the intent under 20 VSA is that all rental properties are public buildings. And then in the definition of a public building, there's language in there about the roofs being connected. So this statutory language cleanup is just a one line insert that's going to clear this up. And under the history of ADUs, going back a number of years, it used to be where if the dwelling unit was 1/3 the square footage, had just one bedroom and so forth, those were exempt. And then what happened over the years is that whole thing just got much larger, and a lot more flexibility was exerted down to the local zoning and planning folks to allow much larger ADUs, right? So they took out that 1/3 the square footage. It had to be subordinate to the primary residence. So over the years since I've been here, that's really changed.
We didn't take out like the subordinate. The subordinate is still there and it's only up to 900 square feet.
Yeah,
I'm really dense, so I've got to everyone's questions, but I just want to make sure I understand. The change you're making would mean that if it is a single family home with an ADU that is not being rented to the public, that is all exempt from being a public building.
that's correct.
But if the change would still mean that if an ADU is being rented under the same roof as a family dwelling, everything is inspected.
Correct,
Okay.
But it
correct.
inspected, but not required.
You're required to meet life safety.
You're required to be sprinkled and everything
No.
else.
What I want.
No,
No,
No.
it's got separate expectations.
yeah, there would be
So what
no,
is expected? So Mike, maybe it would be easier if you tell us if it is rented to the public, what is expected of that as it's renovated? What does it have to have?
right,
If
smoke
it's rented
alarms,
to the public?
right, sorry. Smoke alarms, CO alarms, like a handrail on the stairs, windows for rescue and ventilation. The electrical wiring can actually be completed by the owner or a handyman. Does not have to be a licensed electrician, but there's a work notice required to be filed and the electrical wiring will be inspected. And whoever does the heating system has to be a certified heating technician. So those are the basic realm. And then my intention here is to compile a educational brochure on ADU so that people can understand what the predictable pathway is forward.
That's great, because that's what we were
Yeah.
hoping for, and it sounds like Josh is going to be putting that together with you.
Correct.
So you wouldn't be required to put in sprinklers? And
Not at this point.
Okay, not at this point. And then smoke and COs, do they have to be hardwired or can they be the 30-year, 10-year lithium battery ones?
They have to be hardwired if it's all new. However, if the building, if it's an existing portion of a building that is being kind of converted over without a major overhaul, and if it was built before 1994, we would allow the smoke alarms to be the 10-year in the sleeping room. So there's a little bit of lax back on that requirement. The sprinkler, I do want to mention the residential sprinkler system because as a safety advocate, residential sprinklers are what I would call fairly inexpensive today. And what that allows you to do is there's all kinds of equivalencies and alternatives in the code once you put this sprinkler in, right? So you could build actually like a 3-story ADU unit. You could put bedrooms in the basement of a house and rent out the basement. You would not have to have a window for rescue and ventilation in the sleeping areas. So there's a lot of trade-offs that these residential sprinkler systems provide. And not only that, but the piping is plastic. It's not metal. There's no listing and the water pumps can be purchased at Sears. There's just the technology. The technology today allows for residential sprinkler systems to be installed at a lower cost. So at some point, I do need to take a look at, is it cheaper to install a 13D residential sprinkler system and then allow all these other trade-offs that come into play and see if there's money that can be saved. Right.
Great. I want to, Senator Cummings, I want to just see if answer.
Yeah, no, I just wondered when, and I probably get confused because Montpelier did have for probably 10 years a requirement for sprinklers.
No matter what, if it's a public.
Yeah, any new construction, any major renovation and any change of use.
Got it.
So, but the fire codes, And that's interesting because I have a basement with basement windows, but it has a separate exit. So if I put sprinklers in, that could become an ADU.
Correct.
Montpelier.
No, Montpelier got rid of theirs.
Oh, okay. So
It was
Senator-
added several $1,000s.
I do want to go to
price of
Senator
that.
Harrison, who's doing occasionally, Senator Preston.
Thank you. Trying to be patient. Thank you for being here. Just a couple of questions. So when we use the term public building, I think that might alarm some folks, no pun
Yeah.
intended, because it doesn't mean that the building is open and the public can come in there. It
Right.
just means a building that can be accessible to the public if the public pays to be there.
Yeah, it's.
I mean,
rented
there's
to the
control,
public.
right? So I just
And
think
it does fall under Civil Rights Act, you know, it's a public accommodation, so fair housing, et cetera.
right.
It's not just fire safety, but it's anything that would be considered.
Right, but it's not a building that anyone can walk into.
No.
When you hear the word public building, you think it's a
Yeah.
building that anyone can walk into. Do we have a name for that
So
kind of
maybe a
building?
public unit, rental unit, and not a public building, because that has bigger implications. It's a public, it's a housing unit that's rented to the public.
I
So it's a public
understand.
rental unit.
Right, but I just think we should be clear. Is there a different term for something that is available to the public, like
Like
a hotel or this building or a town hall or a store?
I can't answer that. That would have to.
So
We have
it was-
just, I've been here for 33 years and that's just how it's been defined, but I understand what you're saying. And
Okay,
we, yeah,
all right,
that-
so that's helpful that,
And we
okay.
can have, if you want to write that question down, we can have.
Oh,
the council.
yeah, I did.
Oh, great.
So you mentioned a variance that folks get. Can you go into a little bit more detail on that, please?
right, just like any regulatory body, we accept variances from people, whether they can't comply with something because it's cost prohibitive, maybe structurally they can't complete something because it's just not, it can't be applied out in the field. So we used to have a formal variance panel years ago, and now I pushed all the variances out to the district offices to reduce some of the red tape, right? I hate to use the word red tape, but what it did is it expedited the variances so that we didn't have delay in construction projects that we could. So we issue quite a few variances because people can't afford a certain thing. And so then we design some other safety parameters around, I'll give you an example, seasonal barn venues for weddings. Sometimes sprinklers are $200,000-$300,000 out in the rural area and there's no three-phase power and all this kind of stuff. And so then we accept the fire alarm system and maybe additional exiting so that these folks can run their business safely.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so, you guys are really an important part of the process, just schedule wise.
Yeah.
So that's great that you do that. So couple more questions. So Airbnbs would be considered public buildings, right? Since they're
Yeah,
rented?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've stayed in some that didn't seem safe to me. How would a customer, a person staying there, know either that it's been inspected? Like, is there any sort of sticker or is there any message that we should get out to the public that those units are supposed to be fire safe?
I've seen more than one, of the basement window pictured in the back, which doesn't meet fire code.
Right.
Mike,
Right.
do you have?
Or did I ask that question?
We,
Oh,
a couple of years ago required that owners post this, right,
Correct.
Mike?
That's correct. All the online,
In Vermont? Yeah.
right, for all
Okay, well,
those that register their Airbnb online or through a platform are required to post a guideline checklist, both health issues and the high ticket fire safety issues. And it also has our contact number on that specific certificate. And The only inspections we do on those are in response to complaints. So we're not out
Okay. No, well, you don't have the staff to be out there, I'm sure.
correct.
They have more staff now.
Good. So, that's really good to know. So then just one other thing, when you have complicated systems like sprinklers, or is there any other circumstance where you inspect on a regular basis as opposed to just when the property turns over?
We do inspections on purchase and sales where somebody wants to sell a condo unit. I think you'll find it's not statutorily required, but some years ago, due to a Supreme Court ruling, all the attorneys got on board, or most of them anyways, and they wouldn't transfer property unless fire safety had either records of a recent inspection or we did an inspection. Well, we were doing about 100 to 150 of these when this program first started, and we were trying to, like, no good deed goes unpunished, right? So
Right.
that has gone from doing like 100 a year. Now it's up over 1,000 or whatever. And so we have dedicated staff now just to do these purchase and sale inspections, so that businesses can, the real estate industry can stay running, right? If we didn't do these inspections, all these closings and stuff would be canceled. That's a whole different discussion. That's
Yeah,
just
it
a
is
whole different discussion.
Right. Do you want that requirement to be in statute? Would that be easier for you?
I think right now we need to just do the status quo until right now
Okay.
with the interest rates up, those purchase and sale inspections have plummeted. So there's not a lot of real estate transactions or the sale of condos. Just a heads up on that.
And is the fee that you charge, does it cover your costs?
It covers, I haven't run the numbers in a few months, but it's not a lucrative business for us. No, it's not a moneymaker.
Yeah,
We charge $125. So no, it's not a moneymaker for us.
So.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I want to take the last 5 minutes to make sure you get to address your, the fire and safety code report. Have you seen that? I think you have.
I have, and this is my position on this. I think fire safety should always be looking at ways to keep the economic costs down as low as we can and understand the impact that we have on specifically on housing, but even on the commercial side. And I'm here to tell you that fire safety, we work real hard to find that balance with people. And I don't object to doing this report. What I would just add is that if we could, I have like zero bandwidth. I'm just being honest with you, zero bandwidth. And I would just ask that this report be general enough in nature that it doesn't bog me down to the point I can't complete this without hiring people to do it and so forth. We are in our rulemaking process right now, and we will include our partners, including ACCD and others. And this is the timing actually for this is pretty good because we're in the rulemaking process to adopt the amended codes. So we have already gone through and seen what the changes are to the codes. And now we're in the process of viewing them for economic impact. And then we amend those national standards to better suit the needs here in Vermont.
Okay, can I just quickly ask, so I think we've made it even more general than the original proposal. It is specific to housing. Did you
Correct.
want to make it more general to like housing, economic activity, and life safety are the considerations? Do you want to have commercial, the ability to do that so you don't have to do another study in the future? or report?
The commercial side of it is, we already have substantial data or information on what we've done to reduce the, I'm not gonna say we water down the codes. We take some of the stuff down and we insert equivalencies to where businesses can provide reasonable safety in these buildings. I'll give you an example. A new repair garage where you do automobile repairs requires a sprinkler system over 5,000 square feet. So we're going to take a look at that, realizing that some of these rural small repair shops out there are not going to be able to afford a $200,000 sprinkler system. So we may insert a code provision that if you put an automatic fire alarm system in, and maybe sheetrock it with fire code sheetrock, you don't have to do this sprinkler system, which would save. Well, it would be the difference between being able to operate and not operate.
Right.
So we're already doing that already on the commercial side of this too.
I suppose when you get us the other language about public buildings, if you're just an okay on section 23, or any changes you want to make it as general as possible, knowing that you're going to do the work. We have one more minute, and I did want to channel Senator Brock, who had a question he wanted me to ask. And that was, his first question was just where to find all of these rules. Like, where does this all live so that it's accessible to the average person?
We are in the process right now of setting up a navigation section on our homepage at Fire Safety that is specifically to housing. And that's being worked on right now. And that is also necessary for the enforcement of the rental housing health and safety code. So we have, we're right now working on that to give a one-stop place for all this housing stuff, because to be honest with you, there's tons of information that needs to be available both for landlords, tenants, and other housing partners. So we understand that, and I appreciate that comment, because we are certainly aware that we need to develop this this web page.
Great.
I just have a
I
request.
request, okay. I do want to keep us on time for your constituent. It's our last witness.
Fine. This is all. So Mike, I would appreciate it if you would email us the exact requirements for an ADU that's in a house under the same roof. We just went through some, but we didn't go through the same thing with ADUs that are detached, that are in the carriage house. So if you could send us the exact requirements for each of those, that would be really helpful. And the second thing is, we'd really like an update on what we put into statute last year, the growth of your department, and the increase in the number of inspectors, where you are with that. And what, if we do all this stuff, what additionally you would need.
Okay, would you like a 30-second update on the rental housing safety, or are we out of time?
That's important.
Yeah.
It's coming out of Matt's testimony time because we're taking our break. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
So we have 3 of the 4 allotted positions filled. We are modifying the checklist, the inspection checklist, and we're branding it Fire Safety. And again, we're working on the web page. My vision is that we will embed our new housing inspectors into all the safety advocacy groups, right? So that we can not just be an enforcement entity, but that we can try to reduce tension between landlords and tenants, and be a facilitator to enhancing voluntary compliance is the term I'll use, right? Educating people to do the right thing without coming in on an enforcement angle is much better for us And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. So my vision is not just to put inspectors out in the field and have them run around doing these inspections. They're going to understand all the players and how to point people and directions for resources and that kind of stuff. So it's going to be, this has been a heavy lift for us, but we are getting very close to being able to open up the floodgates here. Right.
Hopefully no floodwaters. Thank you, Mike. That was important for us to understand as we go into budget season, Jane.
Thanks, Mike.
Terrific.
Could
Thank
Could you work with Commissioner Hanford to get us the language by noon on Monday about public buildings? We just want to have.
Probably send it to you today.
Oh, perfect. That
Yeah,
would be
yeah,
even better.
we're good with that.
Okay, great. And we hope you continue to feel relatively well, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for joining.
Yeah, it's
This
good
was
to see
super
everybody.
helpful. Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah.
really good.
The other Mikes that we have in the room, Mike Miller, City of Montpelier. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
So I might let Senator Cummings just frame up our desire to have you in. There's, or I can.
Yeah, no,
Parking, other requirements.
no, I worked for Heaney's. I sold real estate in Montpelier. But I've never had a fire inspector, and I've sold a lot of condos. Usually the home inspector tells you. I've had a lot of having to update sprinklers and smoke detectors, and those have changed. But the city of Barry, I think, has their fire department does fire inspections, but I know we've been both ways with sprinkling for any major change or any new construction. There's also areas where we have water pressure issues. So just trying to figure out, actually, I think there's an accessory dwelling unit on your street,
Oh, probably.
a second built home.
Arsenal.
At the back of Arsenal, at least I heard it was built there.
Yeah, that was new.
Well, it's been there for 4 or 5 years, I think. But the debate, well, I think we answered, they don't have to be sprinkled
Yeah,
if it's owner occupied.
right.
It's the plus of owner occupied. I think that's why that's there.
Well, but if it's not owner occupied, because I know Montpelier adopted accessory dwelling units. In my experience, we haven't been quick to adopt growth areas or additional housing areas. If we change that and say it doesn't need to be owner occupied, and I know there's also concerns about the number of Airbnbs that aren't, does that change? What does that do to the city if we change that?
And if you could, sorry, introduce me,
Oh.
didn't even give you that
So
opportunity.
I'm Mike Miller. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Montpelier. Prior to that, I was working for the City of Barry.
Okay.
So I've been a planning director for about 15 years now. So I'm pretty familiar with whether it's the parking standards, which was one of the things I was contacted, maybe that would be some questions on, but regarding ADUs here in Montpelier, we are already, the state requirements are floors, and you can be
Right.
less restrictive, and Montpelier is less restrictive, so we don't have an owner occupied requirement.
Good to know.
But it does kick you into, obviously, we also have taken over building inspection, both Barry and Montpelier do our own building inspection, so it just trips you into our building code folks that have to follow up in the same way that Mike would. We follow the same rules as Director Rocher.
Well, Senator Cummings has been a great ambassador for the city of Montpelier in this committee. And some of the other things that have come up are the parking requirements, as well as just water sewer capacity. You may have seen other parts of the bill that talk about, increasing density, obviously, of a lot of historic buildings. There's skyline considerations for floor density bonuses. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look through the whole bill, but, you know, parking and sewer water has come up in popular context.
Yeah, I've looked at least those two pieces there, and so from the parking requirements, so in Montpelier, we don't have any parking requirements in the downtown or residential 1500, which is just some high density housing that is, you're familiar, it's like St. Paul Street over by the library.
So there's no parking.
There's no parking minimum at all. Now, there are a number of municipalities that have that same, of urban municipalities that have those same requirements. Berry City didn't have those requirements. St. Albans City, I don't think has parking requirements in downtown. But I think our concern as planners is trying to get a one size fits all that kind of gets to every community, because not every community is in the same position. Whether you're a bedroom community or whether you're a job center, all the communities I listed were all job centers. So the parking dynamic and the parking needs are going to be different for residential, because if you're a bedroom community, you're more likely to be having people commuting out. And if you've got a large building, you know, if it's one per dwelling unit, a 5-bedroom house would have one parking required. Personally, where, you know, I would personally be always pushing for the lowest minimum as I work with my communities, but I'm not sure if I would want to put that as a requirement for every community, because some communities may have a severe parking problem, in which case bringing in new units on, and it may just be for a small area. We always have Berry Street here in Montpelier. That is a problem
That's what I was
street.
thinking about, and if we hadn't had parking for all the new condos and apartments, Berry Street, there is no, those big old houses that got turned into apartments don't have adequate parking. We used to let you park behind City Hall, and I think the police gave you a ride home, but that was the good old days. And we don't do that anymore because we need to plow that parking lot so that all the people that come into town during the day, Montpelier is a receiving community. We blow up during the day.
And you've been working on your transportation within the city, the carpool
Oh,
and
we've been
rideshare.
trying that for years. We tried to make state employees park out at, yeah, don't want to do that again.
Well, I actually got some there out at Labor. There's that shuttle bus. It's working.
I walk out there as often as at least 3 days a week, usually 5 when I'm not here. In that public parking area, no, it's mostly
Under-
walkers. It's people that are out there walking their dogs on the bike path. It's the same 3 cars. I know where my parking space is. A few commuters that take the bus to Burlington. And that one big bus a day comes through. But no, we haven't been real successful in getting people to. I mean, I've been to Dartmouth and ridden the bus and toured the parking lots and was very envious. But
Well, and you defeated your parking lot. I mean, the voters did
no,
defeat.
No.
3 citizens,
3 citizens took it to court,
yes,
and
backed by out-of-town money.
And so I guess I would ask, what is your plan? What is your next plan for how to deal with the residential parking, which is increasingly a challenge in Montpelier? I mean, I think you have no parking requirements now, but you clearly need something.
It hasn't been, there is still parking available. We have adjusted our on-street parking. So we've made a number of policy adjustments.
So you've made it a little less punishing if you are in. the
Yeah, so
wrong spot.
it used to be in the winter, no parking on the street from May to, or from
Yeah.
October to
No,
May.
yeah.
And now we've gone to every other night, alternate street. So it helped a lot for the places like Berry Street. For anyone who might be working in the evenings, it used to be a problem for restaurant workers because all of a sudden you can't park in the street. By the time you're getting out at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're ticketed and towed. So we've gone through a number of changes. We've adjusted our zoning in a number of nuanced ways. on how we count parking spaces. So even if you are only required, let's say, one per parking unit, under the old zoning, every parking space had to be independently able to get out. And now you are able to stack parking if you'd like to, and that just leaves it up to the landlord and the tenants to figure it out. But we don't have a rule that says you can't put 3 cars. If you have a 60-foot driveway, you could stack 3 cars.
park
Under
like
the old
we
rules,
park
that's
at your
25.
house.
Right, exactly.
And that was
Yeah.
very hard. Do we have an impact fee still?
We do not have an impact fee. We removed the impact fee.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
You do just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we talked about water, sewer, density, anything else?
So I'll quickly mention, Montpelier is, I don't know if we were the first, but we went through, when we passed our zoning change in 2018, we went through and made everyone who has a conforming single-family lot can have a duplex, regardless of density. If you're in a non-conforming lot, and we also made 90% of all of our lots conforming, so we adjusted our zoning, our minimum lot size, our density, make 90% of everything conforming. And then follow that up with, if you're still non-conforming, then you have to do an ADU, and those are less restrictive than state rules. So you just have to have the one parking, and it's the 30%.
In your water sewer is at capacity, as I understand it?
No, our water sewer capacity is at 50% capacity. We
Oh,
have,
okay.
we did double
Okay,
Montpelier. And the same,
Woodstock's is at capacity.
okay,
yeah, and Berry City has a lot of capacity as well.
okay, okay.
So both of them are in good shape. But we recognize not every community is. We're very fortunate. Unfortunately, we have sewer capacity and not a lot of flat land that's out of floodplain.
Right,
That's been our
Right.
biggest challenge, is
Yeah.
trying to find, we can infill and we can incrementally add units, which we have been, but we don't have the advantage of, we're hoping now with the Country Club Road project that we're gonna have an opportunity to make a big impact over the old golf course.
What's the status of the Sabins pasture land that's been played with in zoning?
Played with for a long time. There are 2 developers, same folks who've owned it for a while now. And they do have some ideas to move that project forward, and I think we'll just have to wait and see if.
What's it zoned as?
It was in 2018, it was rezoned to have the lower 15 acres closest to Berry Street to be zoned the same as Berry Street. So it is a high density, 27 units an acre, 3.5 story maximum.
That's, quite a change for that end of Barry Street. Because it was zoned residential, and then it was zoned, couldn't put anything but a farm stand on it, and it's been through the zoning in the last 20 years. It's been almost everything, and it's gone now to the highest density, which is interesting.
It's not the highest density, but it is a pretty high density.
Yeah. Yeah, compared to,
Yeah, the river station that you're referring to is 27 units an acre. The downstream housing
Yeah.
is right there that was built new 20 years ago. That's 27 units, just to give a visual of what.
We are out of time, unfortunately. I do want to keep us on track. We've also had conversations about college buildings that could be used for future uses. So if you see a way to report back to us on the value of SRO dollars that help pilot new single room occupancy dorm style living for certain populations.
that's in the works.
Yeah.
now. I'm on the email.
Oh,
chain with
good.
the neighbors.
Well, thank you for being such a great partner in trying to develop smart roads and housing
Okay,
in Vermont. We really appreciate your time.
yeah, and if you
Are not.
need me back, I'm never far away.
That's
So
right. We
If you have some
appreciate
quick
that.
questions, you can always call me back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Lovely day.
Sean Sargent, we haven't had an appraiser in, but we've talked a lot about home values and where home values are increasing, where home values are depreciating. So it was really great to get a connection to you from a former legislator, Oliver Olson, who thought you had a really good take on rural valuation. So thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to testify remotely. It's a huge help for me today. I have a very tight schedule. So as you said, I'm Sean Sargent. I'm a principal here at Sargent Appraisal Service in Rutland. We are an independent fee appraiser. We've been providing commercial and residential valuations in what I define as rural Vermont. So for us, rural Vermont is any county not named Chittenden. So we provide residential and commercial appraisals all over Vermont with the exception of Chittenden County. And as you mentioned, I think we made a connection because we have a mutual acquaintance, Mr. Olson. I recently completed some work for him and he thought some of the analysis and conclusions were interesting enough to be brought up to this level since you're now taking testimony on the housing bill. So what I'd like to say is that first on single family residential is despite increases in median sales price all over the state of Vermont as a result of the COVID pandemic and what I call migration of COVID, perhaps in artfully called migration of COVID refugees into the state of Vermont. We have tremendous increases in median sale price. Most counties saw price increase appreciation on the order of 60 to 70% between the start of COVID and as we sit here today. So despite those increases in median sale price, there is still what appraisers would call an economic obsolescence and what in Vermont we typically refer to as a missing middle gap between cost to construct and market value upon completion. So right now there is anywhere in our analyses between 5% and 30% a missing middle. The fact that a brand new property will cost 5% to 30% more to construct. And that's all costs. That's a combination of soft costs, hard material costs, and of course, labor costs, than it is worth upon completion. So that is, the missing middle is real, and we've seen it in these rural markets since about 2007. During the Great Recession is when this trend came into place. And despite price increases under COVID, it has not gone away. Recently, I did some work for a local housing trust that is engaged in developing a single family project. And I was actually doing missing middle appraisals for the VHFA. And that analysis came back with a missing middle of 20% to 22%. And these are very modest homes. These are 6-room, 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes around 1,500 square feet. We're not talking about a missing middle in 4,000 square foot homes, 5,000 square foot homes, 6,000 square foot homes. We're talking about a missing middle in what should be affordable housing to working Vermonters. So if I switch gears a little bit and we talk about the multifamily residential, we've also seen a missing middle in multifamily residential. This is way appraisers measure it is through a concept called feasibility rent. How high does rent have to be in order to justify the cost of new construction? And again, in rural Vermont, we have market rents that don't even come close to approaching the return that a private developer is going to need to invest in new multifamily properties. So we do see some of this activity. In my analyses since COVID started, every time I analyze these type of properties, they show a negative return to the equity. So what does that simply mean? It simply means that the return to the developer on their equity investment is negative. So it's very difficult to get a private investor to make these type of push these type of projects forward when their analysis indicates that they're going to have negative return on their investment. I spoke with one developer who works pretty extensively in the Morristown area because I've done a number of appraisals for his lender. And I asked him, why? Why do you continue to do this? It doesn't return a profit. He says, look, we're going to make up our money by holding these properties long-term, and we're going to make our money because I'm going to be able to take rent increases. So he has a very long-term vision in the market, and he's invested in that community. But for the exception of those two things, that investment wouldn't be made. The other issue we've seen is that almost without exception, there's only one project I know of that doesn't meet this, and that is all these private developers are limiting their new multifamilies to 9 units. And they're limiting that because the definition of development right now is set at 10 units. They do not want to enter into the Act 250 process because the time, and more importantly, the unknown outcomes. They don't know how long it's going to take to comply with the requirements, those 10 requirements, and that they don't know, because there's no certainty, they don't want to jump into that process. So I sent over to Mr. Moore just a 2-page summary of my testimony today and some recommendations, and I don't know if that's been distributed to you. But after I read through your housing draft 6.1, some of the really important provisions to retain in that are redefining development in 10 VSA 6001 from 10 units to 20 units. So redefining that at 20 units is a really important provision. Had that been in place over the last 5 years, you would have literally doubled the number of private market rate residential apartments that were built. The other thing that's important is right now you're capping the missing middle in that revision at 35%. It's really important to retain that 35%. However, I think an argument could be made dropping it to 30 or even to 25, because then you would be able to spread those dollars that you've allocated over a larger number of projects. When we get into the 35% number, I worry that that would be the state starting to subsidize more than just affordable housing for working class Vermonters. We'd start to incentivize construction of much larger, I don't know what to call them, buy up homes or luxury homes. So it's important to retain the 35. It's also probable that if were you to reduce that to spread the same number of dollars further, that it would be a big benefit to working Vermonters. A couple things that I think you might consider in that revision. The first one is in section 25, which is on page 28 of that revision, that you have asked the Department of Housing and Community Development to design and implement a program to subsidize employer-based housing. I feel that the legislature should provide a little bit more definition to that department before they just send those dollars over. And the only reason I say that is some of this is because of my history in Rutland. We just came out of a system, we're finally exiting a system where we tied healthcare affordability and healthcare insurance access to employment. And thankfully, everybody, federal government, finally, we decided that maybe we ought to divorce the two. And I am worried about a process where we're now going to tie housing stability to employment. And these projects are going on all over the state. We know, I think Fletcher Allen, is it UVM Fletcher Allen? UVM Fletcher Allen has a project going on. Down here in Rutland, Casella Waste has a project going on. I know Middlebury College has a project going on. I know Brattleboro Retreat has a project going on. I feel like if we're going to institute a system where we're tying housing stability to employment, we ought to ask the legislature to more fully debate and define that than to just turn it over to a department. And then lastly, a suggestion I think you might want to consider is in section 31. I'm sorry, section 31, which happens to also be on page 31. Right now, you have a cap on households eligible for the missing middle at 120% of the area median income. And based upon my current analysis of affordability by county, which is on the second page of my handout that I provided Mr. Moore, there is no county in Vermont left anymore where you could buy the median priced home if you only made 120% of the area median income. Every single county now is above 150%. So to purchase, for instance, in Rutland County, where we are, if I want to purchase the median priced home in Rutland County to meet affordability limits, I'd have to make 162% of the median area salary. So I would suggest the legislature consider upping that 120% to 150%. If you raise that number to 150%, you would still be providing a benefit to working Vermonters. You're not incentivizing trophy homes. You're not incentivizing second homes. So those are just two suggested revisions. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And the
Very
35% is right below that. It looks like that you were talking about. On line 10, subsidies shall not exceed 35% of eligible development costs. Is that what
Correct.
you're referring to?
Yes,
Okay.
35% is more than more than generous
You think that-
in this
You think
situation.
that's too great? What,
Too generous, right?
he thinks it should be 25 or 30, is that right?
That is correct. You would be able to spread the same number of dollars to greater number of homeowners, but you would not affect the amount of subsidy needed to spur new investment and help working Vermonters.
That was extremely efficient and helpful. I can see why you do what you do. We have time for a question or two, if anybody has one. We know you have a very tight schedule, and we really appreciate your written and verbal testimony. And former Representative Oliver Olson never disappoints with the people that he sends our way. Senator Clarkson has a question.
So
Yeah.
we've been discussing the value, the low hanging fruit of some of the programs we have incented in the last couple of years. One of them since 1992, the accessory dwelling unit opportunity. And as an appraiser, do you see, because this is a subject, we've been chatting about, do you see homes that have ADUs as having more value or the right value for people who are starting and need income to help pay their mortgage? How do you view as an appraiser the value of having an ADU or not in a home?
Okay, so
Yes, great question. Great question. Yeah.
So again, my job as an appraiser is not to make a market. My job is to reflect the market. And what we find
Right, so-
is, especially during COVID, we did see a buyer preference for homes with accessory dwelling units. The reason is, it is always nice to have that extra unit that can help you pay the mortgage. Financing these homes on the secondary market, when you go to finance these homes through Fannie and Freddie on the secondary market, that process tends to be a little more arduous, but doesn't spur purchases, doesn't affect purchase price. So it's definitely a desirable amenity, and it has been especially under COVID market conditions.
Yeah,
Okay.
a good place to retreat to when you have to isolate.
That's true.
Yeah, just
Not
to
if
follow
it's
up on that,
rented.
that's really helpful. So like per square foot, is it as valuable as the main structure or a little bit less maybe per square foot? Have you seen any relationship?
Yes, it's as valuable as the main structure.
Wow, thank you.
The
Okay,
market returns the same value per square foot.
thank you.
He hasn't been.
Great.
No, this is really, really helpful
Mhm.
and super efficient.
Yeah. But yes, super efficient. We will let you go back to your work. Thanks for everything you're doing in the state of Vermont, especially in rural areas.
Well, thank you
Appreciate it
again.
so much.
Yeah, thank you again for letting me testify. I'm sitting on tons and tons and tons of residential and commercial data. And so if this committee has any additional follow-up questions, if you send them through Mr. Moore, I'm probably already sitting on the data I need to answer any additional questions.
We
Thank you.
love data. So that's really great to know. We will continue to be in touch. Thank you so much. And if you find anything of particular note, please also be in touch.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, there's Matt. He's fine.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just texting you, Matt. So
I
We
am
just all
here.
had data. When you said that, I could see
Hi.
Ann thinking, I'm thinking.
Oh,
yeah.
did you?
Yeah, well, what I'm thinking is my argument last night with the clean heating standard that, above the poverty level, you can't rent a shed for
Yeah, doesn't mean
that,
you can afford it.
which means you can't do the energy cost. I think we need to up our perspective, as it is at rich people who are 150% above the area median. It's people who are just being able to afford their housing, and I think we need to
Especially with
upgrade
interest rates where they are.
our assistance for things like clean heat assistance to that upper level, because the same people that are struggling to meet their mortgage or their rent in this category are going this, if they have to put out any more money, it's just gonna make it worse or harder. And I think it's just changing our perception to the present reality. And the other thing, Tom Lozon, I know you know the Lozon family.
And we've had Tom testify many times.
Yes, well, Tom has an idea for a housing TIF.
Oh, yes, I have talked to her about. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he just told me he
Yeah.
had that, but I have no
With our
details.
Courses combined, maybe.
But that, I mean, if you're looking at a way to do the missing middle and you don't want to leave it to employers,
Right.
because I know the old Tennessee Ernie Ford about owing my soul to the company store. There's drawbacks to employer dependent housing. So that might be another way.
I like that, as long as we can get it to
Just-
Senator McDonald.
Don't tell.
Yeah. I know, right? Hi,
There's
Matt.
Matt.
Hi, Matt. Welcome. Thank you for
Good
joining us.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good to be virtually with you in a committee where I spent many, many hours. So
And I'm sure we will have you back for a longer period of time to talk about workforce development and economic development, broadband, other things. But we understand that you've had some conversations and visions around workforce housing. They may be captured in the rental revolving loan fund that's emerging. And so we just wanted to hear from you, Senator Clarkson. I'll let you add.
Well, no, I think you should, I believe you and Maura have talked about the
Yeah.
revolving loan fund idea.
I believe
Rental revolving.
I believe so. I mean, there's a number of proposals that are out there, but this is the one that Seth has been putting together, or is that a different proposal?
Yeah.
I'm seeing nodding heads. Okay.
Yeah.
But-
Okay.
But I think it'd be helpful for you to tee up the challenge that employers who are particularly doing sort of innovative things are facing. So you take it. I think we've heard from Sam Hooper a bit about his solution. We've heard from UVM.
Yep.
And it would be great to hear from you, who's sort of in between and trying to.
But you can also introduce the center we have Senator Harrison, who I'm not sure if you know, but some people may not know about your work. So
Yeah.
feel free to start anyway.
Sure, happy to do that. So, and if you'll indulge me, I may go in an additional direction in terms of the needs of housing community by community, because we are not a monolith as a state, and I think that's an important thing to take into consideration when developing housing policy. So that would be the thrust of where I would love to go. But my name is Matt Dunn. I am the founder and executive director of the Center on Rural Innovation. We are a social enterprise based in Heartland, Vermont, that is focused on building new future-focused and largely tech economies in rural places. We started with a pilot in Springfield, Vermont. We have now expanded to working with 4 communities actually 5 communities across the state. And we also work in an additional 29 communities across another 23 states, giving us a really interesting perspective on how to do that kind of forward-looking economic development in communities ranging from 5,000 to 50,000 that are not metros. So housing obviously comes up a lot, you can imagine, but the area that I want to focus on is the area of Springfield and how it has fit or not fit into current housing policy and subsidy. And it's an interesting dynamic in Windsor County because you have within Windsor County everything from Norwich and White River Junction that are in some ways economic juggernauts, and Springfield, which is not, and has struggled along with its, I would say, partner community across the river of Claremont to realize the same kind of economic activity and engine and trajectory that the northern part of the county has experienced. And that's a reversal of what it was 40 years ago when I was growing up, where Claremont and Springfield were the centers of industry. And in many cases, in terms of Springfield IP creation, and the northern part was, not doing so great. It had a little bit here, it had a little bit there. There was this Dartmouth thing. In the age of innovation and IP as the center of economic development, those situations have completely reversed, where the spinoffs that are happening in Lebanon and White River Junction out of Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which is a much, much larger enterprise than it was 40 years ago, as well as Dartmouth taking a proactive role in doing tech transfer. You're seeing that economic activity at the northern part of the county at a significantly higher level. So the way that this translates into housing is that in White River Junction, a place where I spent many years doing placemaking from a time when folks had given up on it as a dead railroad town, you can build market rate loft apartments and rent them out almost instantly for $2,000 to $2,200 a month. We've seen it happen again and again on South Main Street, in White River and in other locations. Certainly benefited from the TIFs and other kinds of incentives that have been available to do the community improvements over a longer period of time. But it is a place where that work pencils out, and where investing in in housing with an organization like Twin Pines is incredibly important. And they have, in my view, kept up in many ways better than other parts of the state, where as these market rate units are being developed and put online, they are coming in with ones that can help ensure that folks who are middle income or lower income also can be a part of that community. The challenge in Springfield is that you have a much, much higher proportion of the overall permanently affordable, dedicated to low income housing in that area. Over 10% of the total units are committed to only individuals who are low income in Springfield. The cost of developing a unit of housing is exactly the same as in White River Junction. And yet you can't get a market rate or any, even if you're working under a nonprofit, you can't develop a unit that would actually cash flow, that could pay for itself. And so the only options for redeveloping housing in the Springfield area is deeply subsidized, and under the current opportunities for subsidy, meaning it has to be dedicated to lower income individuals. And in many cases, at least what we've heard from VHCB, has to be focused on transitioning homeless, right? Which is important, it's critical in our state as a whole. But what it does is it means that the units that are being built in Springfield are for a single demographic, even though it's a place where more and more those individuals are having to commute to the center of the economic action, which is in the further north in the Upper Valley. So their commute times become longer. The costs for those individuals then go up. So their ability to work their way out of poverty becomes harder because of that commute. And we're not being able to balance the demographic in Springfield by making sure that there is housing available to young professionals who would love to put down roots there, would like to participate in the kind of activity that we have been supporting at the Black River Innovation Campus, whether it's new tech startups or it's design or it's other kinds of innovation-based economic activity, because there isn't a place for them to live and be then connected to that. So we have been trying to solve for that with the Park Street School redevelopment project, which is intended to address both sides of that, actually 3 sides of it. So incredible community assets in actually making the presenting and theater space and gym accessible to more than 20 people, and someplace that can be a community asset and a center of activity. Creating the co-work space and innovation space and shared podcast studio and other things that are also able to be in that area. And we had the good fortune of having support from Leahy in funding that piece of the puzzle. But then we also wanted to put 24 loft apartments in the same building, being able to be programmed to work with the entrepreneurs that we are inviting to be a part of the Springfield community, to live and work there, as well as doing so without creating a further constraint on the housing. But to be able to develop those 24 units, you're still looking at between $275,000 and $350,000 a unit if you're wanting to do it in a way that is environmentally sound, that is upgrading various aspects, and frankly meeting the code requirements while redeveloping an existing property rather than building something new outside of the downtown on a green space. And so we have struggled with that particular project, but I would say that other development efforts that we have been involved in the downtown have also struggled to be able to create those kinds of units and apartments that would be attractive to a young professional demographic that could live and work in that area. And unfortunately, the trajectory that we're on is that it's becoming more and more likely to be the place where housing for permanently low-income units are located, forcing people to do more commuting, and then creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Springfield is not alone in this kind of dynamic. If you look at housing stock in a Newport, right, versus a Morrisville or other parts of the state, it really takes, in education terms, an IEP, right? It is not going to be the same in Waterbury as it is in Rutland. And we need to make sure that we have the kind of ambitious housing subsidy and investment that the legislature has been really on a forward foot on. But it also needs to recognize that if it's going to have the impact that I think we all want it to, which is to create a more distributed economic benefit and an economy that isn't only dependent on the few areas where there is massive outsized economic activity, housing needs to be appropriate for those locations and still subsidized. Now, we are absolutely open to the fact that if there is subsidy, there should be some kind of rental cap, right? The amount, if there's money coming in saying it's going to be capped at this for some length of time, makes complete sense. Also, if there is a subsidy and it should be owned or operated by a nonprofit, that also makes sense, right? I think there are arguments on either side that, for-profit entities can do this stuff as well. But I certainly am sympathetic to the notion that if there's significant subsidy, it should go to a nonprofit enterprise that will continue to have that as their focus, particularly in these areas where you're just trying to get these kinds of units up and running and off the ground to change the dynamic. So either one of those, conditions makes sense. And if there was a desire to have a band of income eligibility at the start, that also makes sense, particularly for like a 5-7 year period as things are getting juiced in order to be able to get to where the economy is working and so that market rate kinds of things can function better. So those are just some high level thoughts, Madam Chair, and I as we've been in these trenches and seen the funding that's come through, and then had very honest conversations with VHCB about what those funds, should be and can be used for. It was just clear that it still did not allow for this kind of downtown revitalization work that many are trying to do in our communities that have not been economically successful in the last 2 decades.
So thank you, Matt. You now see some of those proposals reflected in the bill, or you're sort of reserving judgment on that?
I do. I haven't, Madam Chair, I haven't looked at the most up to date. I've seen pieces of it coming through. Happy to respond to specific pieces that are in it. An early version of what Seth and others had put together seemed to be heading in a trajectory that made sense, that created greater flexibility for the kinds of activities, that it wasn't permanent covenants only for low-income individuals, that part is covered by other kinds of resources that are out there. I also think there is some value in targeting it to places that are needing that kind of different standard of housing, whereas there are other places which already have a pretty high quotient of those kinds of units in order to make sure there's an ability to compete. The other piece I'd be remiss without mentioning is the story that came out about ARPA funding and where it was being distributed to because of the capacity of individual communities and towns. It's a real thing. And so communities that are in some level of economic crisis, the Springfield town manager spends an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out how to get predatory real estate buyers who have bought buildings in Springfield with no intention to do anything with them on the hope that something might bounce back and they would make a profit on it. And then is dealing with the fact that they are rotting, falling in, trying to negotiate with those individuals. They're not going to be in a place where they can proactively seek out and see what kind of resources are out there to be able to move their community forward on a proactive basis. People like Bob Flint and our work and Mark and others are working hard to try to provide that extra capacity, but it's not easy.
Have you looked at the underserved communities index that's being floated by the administration?
It's in the BAA.
I haven't looked at it in detail. I've just looked at some of the gross numbers of where ARPA funds have gone and where they haven't. I also think there's some really interesting work that's being proposed, and an earmark was associated with the Rural Development Council on trying to create other vehicles to help secure funding to be able to support smaller communities, although they said my hometown of Heartland would be too big under their definition. So there's capacity and size, and they sometimes go together. They don't always.
Right. Senator Harrison.
Yeah, I have too many questions, I realize. So I've just been spending a lot of time in Springfield, and really impressed by the Howard Dean Center, the educational center, and I think it might be underused, but I think it's too far away. So I'll just get with you separately, because that's not directly related.
You and I need to tour.
We were gonna do like a Randolph Springfield field trip or something.
That would be great.
But and then I could do Springfield really quick.
Right, but his last comment, there are ordinances that a few towns have done to require maintenance of buildings with some teeth in them. So now I'm thinking we should make sure that, I don't know if those require state authorization, it probably would help. So I want to try to get that as part of this. I just had that thought, but maintaining our current structures when you have an owner who either isn't able to or refuses to, I think it's really important, and we can do something about that. So I'll hold my questions because we're on a tight schedule.
So
yeah,
I guess once you see the latest version of what we're considering the rental revolving loan fund, I would want to know if that met some of the interest and concern, other than obviously direct earmark from Sanders or Welch. I mean, which I know you're looking for a lot of money to do these 24 units. And-
Yeah.
and
I mean,
would hope
I'm assuming that, I am assuming the era of earmarks is over, just to be clear. So I think there was a moment in time, but I am assuming given the congressional changes that's done.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would say, I mean, the problem with a loan, even a very generous loan, is is that, you know, your equity piece looks complicated. The idea of having a revolving loan that can be forgiven over time so that there is not that burden can make it easier to do. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that, you know, cash flow, right, meets payments and that the whole equity stack works together. But I'm happy to dig deeper into it and provide some direct feedback on those pieces. The other part is that, you know, if it's only, I mean, and this may sound strange, only 20 million, that will go very, very fast. So
Right.
I don't.
Your project is rental or home ownership that you're.
rental.
Rental.
Okay.
So the project, the specific project, but I think there are probably 3 or 4 others that could happen in Springfield if it was available, is it, you know, 24 units that would be a part of this ecosystem that we're building that we'd want to be able to program, but at the end of the day would be beautiful loft apartments with large common spaces associated with things that, you know, you could, if it's, but you can't, even if we did it as a pure market rent play, you couldn't command the kinds of rents that you could command in White River Junction. So the math just doesn't work, even if you're doing it as a nonprofit trying to, you know, on a pure mission basis. That's without any kind of margin.
Great. I'll let Senator Cummings have the last question. So we should take a break.
No, I didn't.
Comment.
I think Springfield as a cautionary tale as to what I've been concerned about, in that if you only put in low-income housing and you don't start out doing a mix, but now because Springfield is where Springfield is, it's going to be harder to attract young professionals, and yet your development costs are going to be as high. You're going to need a better rent than White River to get them to come down, probably. And you need help with development costs so you can afford to rent at a market rate, which should eventually go up as the town develops.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we would hope.
Yeah. Nice last reflection. Thank you so much, Matt, for being here. Thank you for the work you're doing, especially in Springfield and communities that need extra acceleration. We appreciate it, and we will take, so we'll go